Exodus 19 is really the journey that we have from Sinai to the new covenant of the people. Now, as we have already gone on this journey, we have been a part of a lot. We have borne witness to a lot, and the people have already understood God to be at work in their lives, and they have been able to see God doing miraculous things. However, in the midst of all of that, they were actually in Egypt. Now we find them entering into the wilderness and seeing God actually take care of them. It's in this time of the wilderness that they begin to understand God will provide all of their needs. However, it's not always what they want. They are given food and clothing and everything else that they should actually need for their daily life. But we are creatures that want even more. We want to be able to engage in, well, other people. We want to have relationships. We want to have connections. We want to be able to engage with friends and family and be able to see and also be able to go out and do things. We need to be moving. We need to be able to understand a bigger purpose. And God understood that. So God takes them into the wilderness where they would be safe. However, it was also then too where he leads them to a place where he could spend time with them, open up their hearts, open up their minds, and be able to share with them more of who he is and what it is he's going to do for them. It was the third new moon that they arrived at Sinai. Now, why is that so important that we talk about in 19 about the third new moon? Well, now keep in mind this. We're talking about having a lunar calendar. And so when we identify month to month, it's from new moon to new moon. So when we hear of the third new moon from when they left Egypt to where they are now at Sinai, it took them 3 months. Now, the old joke about all of this is that Moses was leading, and a man who was leading a group of people would never ask for directions. And so they got lost a few times. I'm glad to see a few of you laughing at that one. But as they go through this journey, it's also an understanding that there are thousands, there are lots of people that are trying to move from one spot to another spot. And so it's not just simply loading everything up into the car. This is more like moving day, where you have to plan things out, you have to organize, and you have to get everything moved on to the next place. And so there's also an understanding that community really did matter. Community was helping one another move from one place to the next to ensure that everyone had their things taken care of, that everyone was able to be a part of the whole process, and that everyone was able to see and understand what this new place would be. That God was there just as he had been at the previous spot. It opens up the people to know where God is at, to begin trusting God. Now, Moses was already able to talk to God. And so Moses is always entering into conversations with God, sometimes lifting up the struggles, the trials, the tribulations that the people are enduring. Of the people just are struggling with this. They don't understand why you're having them do this. How can I lead them? What can I do? Moses turned to God to be able to understand what it is he should do for the people, that they would be able to know who God is. How is it God could speak and begin to grow that relationship with the people even more? Moses begins taking on some of those roles of what it means to be a priest, to be that connection between God and the people. He begins having that relationship as that leader, but keep in mind, whenever we see the name Moses, and only Moses, we shouldn't just assume that oftentimes when we see the name Moses, it's actually Moses leading the group of people, the elders, the priests, including his brother Aaron, and also a gathering of women led by his own sister, Miriam. So when we see just the name Moses, we also need to be able to think of who is helping and supporting Moses. Because otherwise, that advice from Jethro that we just received in chapter 18 at the last lesson would have gone in one ear and out the other. So as Moses begins talking to God, he's also talking to those elders, the people who they have basically put their trust in, the people who they have regarded as people to be able to go to for decisions, people who would be able to understand what it is that they're going through, and also be able to have them give a verdict, give a decision, and that people would be able to trust it. People would be able to know that this is what is good for not only me, but also for the community as a whole. Some of what we are experiencing now in the world and even in the news is much similar to what it is they experienced in the wilderness. So we can identify when a group of people are wondering what is it we're supposed to do and how is it we're supposed to do it. We're kind of living some of that right now. But it also gives us an insight because of our experience of what it is the Hebrew people are enduring, experiencing, and also struggling with. What is it they're called to do? How is it they're called to be God's people when they really don't know who God is or what God is calling them to do, but they need to take care of one another? They need to be able to understand that their basic needs are met. And then after their basic needs are met, what's next? How is God calling them to be a whole person and not just simply being fed, having something to drink, and having a safe place to sleep? I'm going to pause right there, and I'm going to remind you, if you do have any questions, don't forget to put them in the chat, or even let me know that, hey, you have a question, and what do you mean by this? Or how does this play out with this connection over here that we talked about? As we continue on this journey, God understands that the people are struggling to know and live. As moving from slaves to now being free in the world, but now called to a new place, a new purpose, and even still worshiping a new God. Because keep in mind, when they were slaves in Egypt, they had been incorporated, they had been indoctrinated into the culture and into the understanding and into the religion of Egypt. And so we begin to identify and even understand what that means, that people would be able to now have to reset themselves, have to get in a different set of mind, a different mindset of a different heart, a different way of thinking. The people then consecrated themselves. So what does that mean? Well, when we look at Exodus 19, I am at, let's see, what verse is that? That is verse 9, going into 10. That the people actually begin going to do something physical, something tangible, something that they would be able to do. Now, this is a bath, a cleansing of oneself, something that we do every single day, but at this time was not something that they would typically do on a regular basis, on a daily basis, I should say. That they would then use this time to not only clean themselves and their clothes, but also by entering into the waters, they would then be able to cleanse themselves. They would be the dirt and everything else, and especially their old ways of doing things. If you're hearing echoes of a baptism, you're right. It is here where they are changing their frame of mind, where they're getting a new heart, a new mind, and a new reason for living. And that's very similar to our conversations around baptism. When we enter into the waters and our old sinful self dies, and the Holy Spirit and our hearts and our minds are renewed to what God is calling us to be. Here we have God helping the people go through this process of being consecrated, of being set apart, of being cleansed with new hearts, with new minds, getting rid of the old life and entering into new life. In many of our lessons, in person, mind you, we have talked about baptism. What does that mean? What does that look like? This is something still where we can go back to the waters, hear the promise that we made to God, but also God made to us. That it's a two-way street in that relationship. That when we come to God with our sins and our heartache and our trials, our tribulation, God is also there coming to us, reminding us, I know what this is like. I created you, I've sustained you, and I've been throughout history, a people who have struggled, a people who have endured, and a people who needed this relationship with me. I am still with you. I have not abandoned you. It's here at Mount Sinai where the people consecrate themselves, cleanse themselves, renew their hearts, their minds, and begin learning what it is God is calling them to do and be. For many of the Hebrew people, this is precisely where they were at, to be able to see, bear witness, and understand who God is by God actually moving in the world. Now, many people would love to be able to have that experience, to be able to have God right in front of them, moving in the mountains, moving in the fire, moving and calling us to do what it is we're called to do next. We want those clear signs of a burning bush to go this way and not this way. However, the people don't actually see God. They struggle with God's calling. They struggle with what it is God is calling them to be and do. And so they need this ritual of purification and cleansing as something that will draw them back in, as something that they will need to come back to and use once more. Any questions about any of this so far? I've covered a lot. By the way, we've only gone through one chapter. Well, that means we're ready for the next chapter. In Exodus 20, we find the all too familiar 10 Commandments. But when we talk about it tonight, I'm not going to go back to your confirmation days. I'm not going to go around to each and every one of you and say, now, what's the fourth commandment? What's the first commandment? What's the eighth commandment? What's the sixth commandment? Does anyone know? I'm not going to do that for you tonight. I figure you still have those small catechisms, those lessons that you can go back to, or if you really want to, come talk to me and we'll have a whole other series on that too. But when God does this, he does this for a people who are longing for guidance, for purpose, and to know what it is they should do and what it is that they should stay away from. How many of us don't feel that right now? We want to know where the boundary is. We want to know what it is we should do and what it is we should stay away from. We want to know where we're going to be safe and what it is that will harm us. So we have that clear, distinct line, that clear, distinct direction and purpose. God descends upon Mount Sinai in a cloud and in fire. But what does that look like? Do we have any image of what that would be like in our own modern times? Well, we really don't. I would say the closest thing that we actually have of what this could easily look like or even get our minds wrapped around is if you've ever looked and seen a sunrise or a sunset and seen the clouds on the horizon and they're orange, they're red, they have all of these beautiful colors. This is the image that is often used to describe what Sinai looked like. Only it wasn't in the morning, it wasn't in the evening, it was during the day, and so it was a continual where light was shining through, and yet that beauty was present because God was present. It's here where God gives that order, that structure for the people then to be able to understand what it is they could do and what it is they couldn't do. Keep in mind, the Hebrew people had been slaves for hundreds of years. A slave is very much used to being told what to do, how to do it, where you will rise in the morning, and when you can go to bed at night. When you find yourself with freedom, you want to do everything. You want to do it all. But not everything is beneficial for you. Some things are harmful. It's here, though, that God begins also laying the groundwork of fear. When God descends upon the mountain, he's there with fire, he's there with thunder, he's there with lightning, he's there with loud trumpets, with a booming voice. And yet the people begin fearing what God could do, what God would do. And God even gives them warnings of be careful. Don't come too close to Mount Sinai. Don't come too close, because if you do, you will perish. So he warns the people, if you come too close to me and stand in my presence, you will die. He does this, though, to also help them understand why and how. I'm going to give you two examples of why God would do this. Growing up, how many of you feared your parents? You can just give a nod yes, or a kind of. A thumbs up, yeah. It's that relationship with your parents that you not only loved them, but you trusted your parents to be able to provide for you, to be able to care for you, to be able to be there for you. But at the same time, too, you were a child. You were still growing. They were much bigger than you. And your parents were sometimes the one who laid down the rules, the laws of, no, you can't do this, you need to do this. And you feared your parents of what it is that they would do to you. Would you get sent to your room? Would you have another form of discipline? It was something as a way to guide you, and yet it was out of fear and love that your relationship with your parents evolved, it grew as you grew. God had a similar relationship where you not only loved God, but you also feared God. It seems like two sides of a same coin. And yet there's also an identification of power there. That when you love someone, when you trust someone, when you give someone your heart, you also have that fear of what are they going to do with your heart? Are they going to break your heart? Are they going to disappoint you? Is it going to separate? Is it going to hurt? And so you have this fear of this love where it is both present. Where this power, this trust, this love, this fear, and all of this seems to be all intertwined. In this relationship with God, this relationship with one another as a community, God did this so that the people would not sin. That the people would be able to not only engage and understand what God was calling them to do and be, but that they would then be able to understand what would help them and what it is that they should stay away from. Whoop, I'm going to go back here real quick. And I'm going to pause us and say, do you have any questions? We've covered a lot. 2 chapters, by the way. Well, seeing none, I'm going to keep us moving then. Someone have a question? Sorry, I didn't mean to. Oh, maybe not. As we go into the scriptures, oh, we did have a question. Let me go back here. So in the chats, Kimball asked, why were the people afraid if they wanted God in their lives? The people were really uncertain as to what God would have them do, what God would mean, how would their lives change. And so with that uncertainty comes fear. They were afraid of how much would life change as they knew it. How much would God call them? Whenever we talk about God's calling, you also have a little bit of fear and trepidation as to, well, where is God going to call me next? Is God going to call me to do that? I don't always feel comfortable doing that. Can't someone else go in my place? And so it's also a little bit of, well, our own experience. And so we can identify some of that fear, that afraid of what that really means for them and for everyone else. As God calls them to be a new people, set apart from others, that means that everyone's going to look at them and see, well, their differences. People aren't always good at supporting one another with their differences. We often will look and see and say, oh, that's different. I don't know if I can do that. Any other questions? Great questions. So please don't hesitate. In Exodus 19, we find one of the places where the Ten Commandments are listed. Yes, there's more than one place where the Ten Commandments are listed. I tell you that because depending if we're looking at Exodus or the other places, people will then group them together in such a way, in such an understanding, that we then begin to need to clarify which number we're talking about, and more specifically, what that number is. For some traditions, 1 through 3 has to do with your relationship with God. Other traditions, 1 through 4, have to deal with your relationship with God. It's the same rules, but it's how you divide them up and how many are you attributing to God and how many are you giving to the rest of the community. Now, there's still only 10 commandments, but it is important to really talk about, because if I were to say, well, obviously the 4th commandment has to deal with this, it could be honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy, or honor thy father and mother. Well, depending on who you're talking to, you may be talking about 2 different commandments with 2 very different meanings, with 2 very different outcomes. As we look ahead then, we're also looking at to the reason why God has given all of these laws, these commandments to the people. It was for good order. And so in the next chapters, in 20 and 21, and even through 22 and 23, we begin understanding what is the good order that God is actually giving to the people in how to live, what it is you should do, and what it is you should stay away from. God starts just as he does with the 10 Commandments, the relationship between God's people and God. So in Exodus 20, verse 22, he starts with the law concerning the altar. Now, the altar is just like what we have in our own modern day worship, the place where you would have God's presence, where there is a direct connection between God and those who are living, in which there is a sacrifice. At the time where God is talking about in Exodus, there's really a sacrifice on behalf of the people. In our time, we truly have more of a sacrifice given by God in Jesus Christ, the sacrament of Holy Communion. Here at the altar, we have that same interaction. We have that connection where God and people are coming together to understand that relationship. And sometimes we need to do that. We need that space. We need that time of coming back to a common place. For many of us, it's the dinner table with our own families, a time of seeing children, time of seeing parents and saying, what's going on in your life? And boy, I'm tired from today. Can't we just spend the weekend together and just sitting in the back patio or out in the pool or simply spending time together? A space where we might also need to be able to look at one another at the dining room table and say, I love you, but I've had too much of a good thing, and we need to spend this weekend, at least Saturday, apart. It's here at that shared space of the altar where we are able to come together and have reconciliation, to be able to have honest feedback, to be able to have that honest relationship between God and the people. And so the altar becomes that place, that intersection where God and the people continue that conversation. In Exodus chapter 21, we have, there we go, the law about slaves. Now, this is something that in our own modern times, we no longer have slaves. However, here in Exodus, this is where we actually have laws that are how it is you should care for your slaves, how it is you should not only provide for them, not just treating them as property, but also ensuring that they are healthy, making sure that they are educated, have time, just like you have time to rest. How are you letting your slaves rest? And so it was an identification, not only that slaves were okay, but how are you taking care of your slaves? How are you treating them as human beings? Now, this passage in Exodus 21 was used for hundreds and thousands of years to justify why Jews, Christians, should be able to still have slaves, because God himself said it was okay. However, as time went on, we realized that human creation, God's children, went beyond. That as we talk about being children of God, especially in Christ, we began looking upon one another, not as slaves and free, but truly, as Paul writes in his letters, we are all one in Christ Jesus. And a shift begins happening of who we are, how we view one another, that there's now a great equal. Going back to that altar, that where we interact with God, when God has people around an altar, he does not look upon us as slave or free, as rich or poor. He views each and every one of us as children of God, as beloved children. Come to the table.
Hey, Pastor.
Yeah.
On what you were just saying about slaves in Exodus, and then how it, how thoughts on it changed, especially after Jesus.
Sure.
I've always kind of wondered about this. Is this God growing and changing as he spends more time with humans, or is this the human influence in the writing of the Bible? Anybody ever thought about that?
Oh, yes. I'm trying to figure out how to answer your question without diving into a whole new lesson.
Okay.
I'll say this. This is where God is identifying the brokenness in the world and giving people order and structure to be able to not only realize the value that people are, but also to be able to say this world is some place where we need to be mindful of what it is we're doing and how it is we're treating one another. There could be a whole lesson on this because we're talking thousands of years, different ideologies, theologies, how we're viewing people, how we're viewing gods, and all those different things. Because these are also conversations that have happened not only in Christianity, but also in other religions. Exodus, though, was truly God allowing the people, do you realize you just came from slavery?
Right. I wondered that too.
As you're going out into the world and entering into these ideas and being a new nation and how it is you're going to be a people, how is it you're going to be different to no longer be treating your slaves as you were just treated?
Right.
And now taking that experience, that knowledge, and moving it into how it is you are different. The idea of that this would be humans writing in here is not so much it's a both and, that there's probably a little bit of human writing in here where, yeah, but what about spoils of war? What about this? How do we then, as we just had in the previous lesson where Amalek attacked the Hebrew people, what do we do with the spoils and the not chosen people of God? Because they can't be brought in, but we also shouldn't just, I'll say, remove them from the world. That's me trying to simplify that and condense that down into a way to answer that question, I guess.
Sure. Well, it helps. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. And Kimball, you got a question too?
Yeah, I'm going to further muddy the waters, I think.
Okay.
Why, if our God keeps preaching grace and goodness and love for our brothers, would deliver us from slavery and then seemingly turn around and support slavery? I have a real disconnect on that.
Mm-hmm. Here's where I'm going to say the grace, love, and mercy that we often talk about as Christians was not necessarily the same mindset that the Hebrew people had, and it wasn't taught that same way. Grace, love, and mercy really came in Jesus Christ, and especially in Paul's letters, where he really was trying to get a radical love, a radical grace of it not only being for the Jewish people, the chosen people, but now it's going beyond even that nation among those people and going into the pagans, into the Greeks, into the others. And so that grace and mercy that we as Christians will wrestle with now, it's a different mindset in the Old Testament. It's more of a distant fear of God, and a fear that God is either punishing us or going to kill us on a whim. So how is it we are going to be in right relationship and able to walk that narrow path that God is calling us to be? And so this is often where we refer to the Old Testament as the law and the New Testament as the gospel. Truly, though, there is law and gospel in both testaments, but this is where we truly do have more of that idea or concept of fear, of guidance and good order. Does that make sense, Kimball?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Do Moses' followers, feeling that they were the chosen ones, did they feel that they were superior to other groups of people? And did they take their slaves from any particular other areas of people? I'm assuming they didn't take their own and indenture them.
So you have really two questions there. So currently, at this time, no, the Hebrew people did not regard themselves as better or other. It was more of an idea of how it is they are set apart. There's not a above or lower. It's more of you do your way and I'll do my way. Of you're going to live your life over here and I'm going to live my life over here in a different way. However, how shall I put this? The difference in the people, though, is largely around their religious practices. It's mostly around how it is they're going to worship, how it is they're going to honor God and still be aware of the world around them. The other question then that you raised was, where did they get their slaves? You'll hear about this in other passages. Typically, you get slaves through war, and they would be a spoil of war, especially the victor taking the loser and making them slaves. Oftentimes, they would remove the men, and then they would take the women and especially the children with the losers. They would often take the next generation there from the women and make them the slaves so that they could, for lack of a better term, brainwash them and incorporate them into that mindset. I just saw someone post something here. Okay. So I think that was Cindy. Was that Cindy who posted this? Yep. Okay. That she in chapter 19, verse 4, it refers to "I bore you up on eagle's wings," and she just was reminded of that hymn and that song. And then in chapter 21, verse 7, it talks about a man selling his daughter. We'll get to that when we're talking about laws of property. Yes, that will be a thing. Let's see. There's another question. My question as I was reading this week was, what lessons are we to get or use from these verses to apply to our lives today? Ooh, great question. One we're going to tackle at the end. I want to kind of get through the different building blocks of this, or the steps, and then be able to look down and see how it all fits together. So, Kimball, I'm going to come back and say, did I answer your question at least a little bit to maybe even get your wheels a turning a little bit more?
Fodder for another time.
Okay.
I digress.
Okay. Yeah, that's a whole lesson in itself, I'll just say. Um, because even the next section here, we're in 21, verse 12, we actually talk about laws concerning violence. Now, this was often Hebrew person to Hebrew person. What do you do when violence is committed against someone else? And violence can be anything between a fist fight to death. And so what does that look like? What does that mean for the different aspects of violence that can take place within society? What guidance can God give to detour people from doing it, and what it is that would be retribution or guidance, that how do we solve, how do we have resolution or restoration of a relationship following it? If you go through 21:12 through 27, he really does outline a lot. And it talks about what it is you should do for a father or a mother striking someone, of kidnapping a person, or even has been sold or held as a possession, and that even these things would be put to death. So it was very harsh in order to detour people. A lot of this, though, has to do with, at this time, people were also very, I don't want to say violent, but they were very quick to use a sword, a weapon, to not only defend themselves, but also at the means of harming someone else. That sometimes our emotions would get the better of us, and that they needed something in order to curb their own heart and desire to pause themselves. Well, if I do this, then this will be the retribution against me. This is also where we have an eye for an eye, a blood hate going from family to family. In our own modern times, especially here in America, we would have the Hatfields and the McCoys. That idea of, well, my family just doesn't like your family because of what happened 5, 8, 20 generations ago. And because we lost that pig, we still don't like you. Of where there was something that happened years ago. And so finally, what would be the law that would enact retribution, but also restoration? And it came back to that very first law, where it wouldn't necessarily come from the community, from person to person. It would come by coming to the altar, by having a sacrifice and realizing God is in the midst of the community, and that God would be able to bring restoration in this violent act. But now we're going to restore through God's presence. That comes actually in Exodus 22. So I jumped ahead over one. So, but it connects. So I wanted to really draw that clear distinction there. As noted before, there's also laws concerning property. All of these things that we're talking about, we are talking about a male patriarchic society in which in which the man truly owned everything, in which even in marriage, there would be a passing of ownership from father to husband. And so part of that was ancient tradition that we still practice today, but may not necessarily associate it as such, of which there is a passing of property, in which there is a understanding that a relationship or a connection is also a transaction. In these laws concerning property, it had to do with not only what we would consider property of a house or even a physical, tangible thing, but even livestock, of grain, of food, and also slaves and people. And so when we're talking about these laws of property, it really does cover a wide swath of society and how it means to truly have an idea of this is a core foundation. These are laws of guidance, but truly it's not something that it could be laid out in stone. It needed to be by elders, by the society as a whole, of how it is we're going to support and uplift all of these things. What it is we're going to agree that, okay, yes, this is a good and fair purchase. We acknowledge that this is going to this and that this now belongs to you. I'm going to try and clear up some of the mud in the waters to bring us back to a more modern understanding of law of property. When you go and buy something and you go to the checkout aisle, you get a piece of paper saying that you purchased something, saying that you were gave a certain dollar amount of a value for something. And we call that a receipt. Back in this time, there was no formal receipt, okay? Instead, the identification of property being transferred from one person to another was that you had to go to the elders, you had to go before a group of people, and they had to say, yep, we acknowledge that the property is going from here to here. And we all know this, we all agree to this, and we will honor this transfer of ownership. I'm going to cover one more law, and then I'm going to open it up for more questions and conversations around all of these. In Exodus 22, we have the laws of restitution. So this is really having to do with that, what I talked about earlier of how do we come back, how do we restore, how do we have those good relationships when we have a broken system or a broken relationship because of thief or stealing, because of jealousy or other things, or even death, even of murder, of other things. What would that look like to have that restoration when someone borrows animals and does not return them? What does that really look like? How should those restitutions be made? Any questions about all of these? I'm glossing over because there's a lot of details and a lot of things that we could really get lost in the grasses, I'll just say. And by the way, it is okay if we muddy the waters even further. I'm okay with that. But
So, Pastor, these laws, were these laws passed down from God as guidance to the Israelites?
yes. So these were the idea here is that God was speaking to Moses. Moses was bringing it to the elders or leaders of the people, and then the leaders were then, I'll say, administering or applying these laws.
Right. Did man very quickly morph these laws?
Yes. You'll as soon as you get into the next book of the Bible, we go from the journey into man trying to take these laws and expanding them. What do they mean? How do we live them out? Let's more clearly define them. So we have Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, where they are all expanded, and I'll say the blanket gets unfolded, if you will. Any other questions? Does that answer everything, Kimball?
Yes.
Okay, great. Seeing none, I'm going to keep us moving. Social and religious laws. I saved this one for a reason. This comes at the end of Exodus chapter 22. There's really an understanding where both social and religious laws are really blended, that you cannot separate the two, that when something is done wrong between two people in society, that God is also present in it. That not only are you speaking ill of someone else in the society, but now you're also speaking ill of God. So even in your restitution, even in your laws, there's an understanding that you need to restore this relationship with this person, but you need to go to temple, you need to go to church and make your heart and your relationship with God right again. You need to be able to restore, you need to be able to connect that understanding, because God is there also. That when we're talking about these social and religious laws, there's no distinction between this is only over here. No, this is all of it. And so when we're talking about faith and life, it's everything and all. Whew. The laws are fun. In Exodus 23, we find ourselves, how are they going to honor? What are they going to make as practices in their lives? Something that really makes these laws something that they can not only teach their children and pass on from generation to generation, but how is it we are going to live these out and be reminded of why they are important and how God has given them to them. And so we have actually ideas here of how there is justice for all people. That in the midst of our lives, we need rest. Just as God rested on the seventh day, we need to rest and have time with God, that we would be able to dwell in God's word. We would be able to be reminded of this relationship and even restore our heart, our mind, and our souls and our very lives to who God is. One thing, though, is a sabbatical year. This often referred to an agricultural community in which you were to take, oh boy, was it every fourth, fifth, or seventh year? That one I'm going to have to look up again. But you would...
So for 6, leave it fallow on the 7th.
There we go. All right. Thank you, Chris. that you would just do as you just said, you would sow for a field, and then on the seventh year, you would let it rest. And so the nutrients and everything else, just as you would then be able to be recharged, the ground itself would be able to be recharged. And so it's an identification that just as God created you, you are a part of this creation. So what you do for yourself, you should also be aware of the world around you, to take care of it, to be able to instill in it and understand how God is actually calling you to live as a whole of your life. I'm going to have us jump now to Exodus 24. We're going to go over the promise of the conquest of the Canaanites, and we're going to go right to the covenant is sealed. At the bottom of Mount Sinai, we have each of the tribes of the Hebrew people. The 12 sons of Joseph or Israel or Jacob are all gathered together, and in each spot a pillar is placed. It's here where we have a recognition of each and every one of these groups of people has a personality, a distinction, and also will have a role to play in this larger society and a larger community. That we are able to then understand as the covenant is read on the mountain with God, how it is they're going to live it out. Now, as this covenant is read, the people are there to listen, and they are eager. Yep, whatever you say, God, we're going to do it. Well, now hold it. Before you dive into something, you should really read the fine print. What are you getting into? What does this really mean? And as Teresa's question, how does this really apply to your life? Don't just dive into it, understand it. And so Moses says, let's go through the covenant. What does this mean to be a people of God set apart in the world? And not just simply saying, yep, we want it. So he goes through and offers an understanding to the people. What is the promise that God is giving to us? What is the life that we are being called to live? Now, understand this. It's not completely drawn out as to on Monday you should do this, Tuesday is this, Wednesday is this, and Thursday is this. It's not that clearly defined. But as we were talking about the laws, we have guidance, we have an understanding of what it is you should do and what it is you shouldn't do. It's here, as the covenant is read, that oxen are sacrificed. Now, this is important to note, that when those oxen are actually sacrificed, it's a sacrifice for the people to recognize the wonder, the gift, and the life that God is giving to them. For any of you, well, especially here in Texas, who love brisket and ribs and a good barbecue, you know the value of especially hamburger and beef ribs and all those different good meats. It's also an identification here too of the power that oxen have. What it is, how meaningful, how wealthy, how important these animals truly are. And these animals are sacrificed not just for you, but for the whole community. That as you bear witness of this animal giving its life, you would be able to understand your life as you knew it is ending, and a new life is beginning. Remember that ritual of purification, of cleansing, that ritual of renewal? Here, we're having a covenant being made, getting rid of the old, the new. As those oxen are sacrificed, half of the blood goes on the altar. A recognition and a resemblance where God is responsible for half of the work, for half of the message, for half of the promise. The other half of the blood is sprinkled or sprayed upon the people, a recognition that the work and the promise is also on the people, that the life and the relationship is present for all and in all, that when one person falters, we are all faltering. When one person succeeds, we can all succeed and learn. It's here, at that altar, that intersection where God and humankind come together, that this relationship, this covenant, this promise begins and continues. Because as we find out in the future, people start the relationship and falter. They fail, they sin. They come back to be renewed, to be able to have that time in God's presence, in God's life, and to recognize and realize that God is still there. That's the end of our lesson tonight. I'm going to open it up to questions and, I guess, thoughts that you might have. And I'm going to go around to each and every one of you so that I can not only see, but also, if you want to, write it in the chat so you don't forget it. I'm going to go right down the line, though, of where are you at? What stood out to you? What questions do you have, or anything else? As we've already had a couple of people share, I'm going to start with, I was going to start with Miss Allison, but then she just left. So Shannon, I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to have you start us off.
All right. I think today was a little deep, like heavy, just laws. But as I was reading and you're talking, what I highlighted in my Bible is Exodus 20, verse 24. And I really liked, in every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love that. I think in the story, even with all the laws and like everything, like God gave us the commandments, and as you're going through the wilderness, and he's just right there with you, and as a slave and coming out of the wilderness, you know, it's so unknown, but he's trying to emphasize of him being the rock.
Okay.
And I don't know, it just gave me a lot of peace reading, you know, as I'm thinking of all this laws and this and that, because the Old Testament just seems so violent and so disturbing at times, especially in the Torah. So this verse just gave me a lot of peace reading.
Sure. I'm reminded in the Old Testament, there's still good news. There's still gospel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And we can still hear it and feel it too. Thank you for sharing. And next, Miss Cindy Niedewitz.
Um, I guess my only comment would be I'm kind of with Chris and Kimball. I struggle with this section of the law, particularly the slavery part, just because, and I don't want to go into it longer because we've talked about it, but it just seems to me that that part has been used for so many years to justify slavery. And this is a hard section for me to really find good things in. So I'm really glad Shannon found that verse, because I think that gives a little bit of gospel to what is a very difficult, section. I do understand, though, why they did this, because they were trying to put some order. They were no longer in Egypt, where Egypt law took place, and where it was all structured around what the Egyptians did. And this is their law, basically, like we have laws. This is their law, and God put that forth.
Right. And I think the other thing in there too is we can also learn from what has been before us, that even in the hard and difficult passages that we wrestle with, we can still find God there. We can still understand that God is in sometimes the messy parts of things too. All right. Miss Lorraine.
Okay, so I picked this up when I was reading to prepare ahead of time. And as he was leading them out of Egypt into the wilderness, I'm thinking of all these followers, all these people that are following because they want to believe, and they want to accept what Moses is delivering them through God. And in a couple of verses, 19:4, God tells Moses to remind the people that you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And then again in 2022, where is it? So the Lord tells Moses again, tell the Israelites this: you have seen for yourself that I have spoken to you from gods to be alongside me, yada yada yada. But anyway, how he's reminding them kind of not to be afraid, because you've seen it. You've already seen it. Remember, you've already seen this. And it was that just really touched me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, I think, a reality where we do see God in our lives, and then the next moment, the next hour, boy, I wish the world was a better place. Boy, I can't understand why this is happening or that's happening. And it's like, don't you remember? That sometimes we do need to realize that, identify that, and be able to say, God is with us. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Miss Joanne Stanley.
Okay. It took me a while to get the microphone found.
You're good.
The one thing that I found is in verse 21. Of course, if someone's life was destroyed, he did say another life should be someone else they should die for that. And, I mean, that's kind of breaks that part down. Whereas in restitution, it's things that are committed against another person. But I found verse 23 in 21. I think this all was kind of disturbing, as everybody else sounds like they did. that if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, and it just burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. That's kind of disturbing, I think. I mean, it kind of goes against what Jesus said, where you turn the other cheek.
Yep.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what? Do you understand what I mean?
It is a radically different
I have
idea.
seen a saying. I have seen a saying that says, if you take eye for an eye, you leave the whole world blind.
So true. Yeah, this is, I'm reminded that it is a different time, and it is also a different mindset for a lot of people. Because when they're still trying to understand who God is, they're still trying to figure out the power, the fear, and also too, how do you understand God in the broken world? I think a lot of people, when the rubber hits the road, where is God in all of this? And I think some of the laws even here are even in the brokenness, where is God at? Where is God helping to lead and guide and really be with the people, even in their brokenness? Even when God doesn't say, well, there's never going to be any more crime. There's not going to be any more destruction or anything like that. He almost identifies and says, we tried getting rid of all the problems. That didn't work. So we need to embrace the problems, but what do we do with them? And how do we help the community as a whole and the individual pieces, the individual people? It does raise a lot of questions, especially because this is such a distant idea for many of us. I mean, slavery, violent wars, and all of those kind of things, we typically keep them at a distance from us. We're rather safe, I'll say, in our own homes. But I also think, too, that recognizing and turning into some of those challenges is important to really grow in our faith and even learn from other people who have gone down that path. So, well, thank you very much. Next is Miss Teresa Ward. Oh, you're still muted. Can I? Oh.
I too would like to say that I love that Shannon found that part about, you know, him being the rock, and that was very, because this is very difficult, as I stated in my question. And I also love that what helped me too was also you saying that, and we all know this, but sometimes you just need to be reminded that we can always find God even in the ugliness and the negativeness of the world. So, and we need that right now a lot. So I love that I was able to get those positive things out of this. That was very helpful. So thank you.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we're here together so we can help each other out. All right, Lundgren's. Oh, you're still muted, actually.
Yes. Okay, now we can. I was intrigued with one thing that you had said, Pastor, about how we need a safe place to sleep at night. And And when they're out there in the desert, they didn't have RVs. They didn't have campgrounds that they could go. I was just wondering, I was trying to picture this large group of people wandering around in the desert, and are they staying at the same place for several nights? Are they traveling large distances every day? Do they have to pick up all their possessions and go? And what does a safe night's sleep look like when they're out on the desert?
Ooh, boy. So I'll answer this as best I can and as quickly as I can. How's that? So typically when they moved by smaller nation or by tribe, that they would have all the Benjaminites gather together, and now it's your turn to move, and you're going to move 5 to 20 miles or whatever it is, and then you're going to stay there for a few days while everyone else catches up. And there's not too much of an overlap, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of men, women, livestock, and possessions. So oftentimes they would break themselves into, for lack of a better term, their own tribe, their own family units, and help each other move from place to place. And you would take turns being on the outside ring that was most susceptible to bandits or security. And there would be a night watchman. That old idea of someone who would stay up through the night to watch out for danger and to sound the alarm if something was needed. Yeah, it's a little bit different, but for a vast majority of people, I'll say, much like our own modern times, we have a majority of the society that is awake during the day and sleeps at night. And yet we still have people that work at night, but it's a smaller percentage. And they would have a very similar process where people would stay up for protection, for security, and to take care of the animals and other things like that. And it would be organized by family or tribe.
So would they have tents?
Yep. They would still have tents. You would still have blankets and all the, your pots, your pans, that kind of stuff. You would still have possessions that you would bring along, including clothing or jewelry and other instruments and stuff like that. Everything would come along, but it's all got to be portable.
I'd like to make just 2 comments.
Sure.
I was thinking about how the laws of our Constitution that we live under today have probably stemmed from and are part of how we live today. And we're going back, 4,000 years?
This would be, this would actually probably be from our modern time, more like 8,000 to 9,000.
8,000 years.
Give or take.
These laws have traveled through the Greeks and the Romans just for very recent governments. And here we are still living under those laws. And the second comment I'd like to make is how very similar what we're going through today with the pandemic is like that of the Israelites in the wilderness. We had a life. It wasn't that great, but it was okay, And now we've got a whole new set. We're giving up the new life. We've got a new normal and a new life that's coming up. And how people will go along with being restricted for a while. But even with the Israelites, they get tired of it. Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to go through this? And we see today the demonstrations that are in the street and the, we talked about the brokenness of the whole situation. And it's accepting that new life. And it is hard to accept new rules and new regulations.
Agreed, and especially when it's unfamiliar or unknown.
Right.
And
consequences.
Well, we're trying to figure it out because God is revealing it to us, and we're trying, and it's being revealed to us today. There's some parallels, and yet I'll say there's some learnings that can happen for us too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, thank you very much, both of you. All right, Kimball, you're next on my list.
I'm glad I wasn't at the top of your list.
Well, oh yeah, well, the good list.
In general, these chapters, I agree with Cindy and others that this is just really brutal. And I'm thinking about trying to put myself in the place of these people. And here, God saved me, led me out into the wilderness. Okay, the wilderness. Now I'm starting to be a little pouting SOB. This isn't better. What the heck? And now you get me over here and you say, okay, how about this? We got rules for you. You got to deal with these rules. And I'm going, maybe I want to go back where I was. I already knew the rules and I knew I'd be taken care of. Yeah, I love you, God, but this is a known entity. I'm wondering how much this is going to come out glaring on what I think of human nature. How many people started scheming and positioning to be one of the elders so they could interpret the laws and pass judgment on their peers? Or how could they work the system? And neither one of those are godly.
Yep.
I would believe God expected that because I'm sure he knew he laid, to coin the phrase, he laid down the law. And I don't know a lot about the New Testament, but I know far less about the Old Testament except for the glossed over, really little stories.
Sure.
And this is just like, really? God, you're supposed to show us that this is going to be a good path. And I'm here saying, I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for improvement.
Yeah. So one of the things that you kind of bring up is the selection of elders. What does that look like and what does that mean? We actually hear later on, I believe, that the Spirit of God rests upon the people, so that God is actually the one choosing with hearts and people who are fearing and loving God and have at their core being who is going to be trustworthy and also going to be, I'll say, not in it for themselves, who aren't going to be scheming and setting themselves into that roles.
Just like all the high priests that were taking the money for tithing and stuff.
Later on, yeah.
I'm the lack of faith in human nature right now person.
I'll say we need to identify that brokenness so we can finally have healing.
I'll take that as a positive.
There you go.
I want to thank Shannon for finding the positive in this whole series, because I was not.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's all I got.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yep.
And then Mr. Wagner.
All right, some parts of the Bible I now read with older eyes and a hopefully wiser mind. This section is not one of them. I'm instantly 13 years old again, and all I hear is Charlie Brown's teacher going wah, wah, wah until it gets to 10 commandments, and then I have to memorize them, and then panic sets in, and I'm instantly back there. I'm trying. That's why I was interested in this, because I was like, maybe I can get some more out of this, but yeah, I'm not really there yet. So, but I'll be back next week.
Okay. So I'm going to try and wrap all of this up with why or how does this really apply to our own daily life? For each and every one of us, There is times in our life where we need guidance, we need rules, we need that structure of how it is we're going to be community so that we're safe, so that we're secure, and so we have that familiarity of what it is to do and be. But we also need that community together in order to truly see and bear witness and remind one another where God is at. That even in that brokenness, even when someone says something against us, hurts us, or is vengeful for that eye for an eye, we are able to identify it and be able to say, I don't want to live that way. There's something more, there's something greater, there's something that can fill me with hope in this world that God has prepared for me and is now calling me to do and to be. I'm glad in some regards to hear that many of you are struggling with this, that it does kind of feel like the pit. Because, yeah, there is a realization here of it's not perfect. It's not the world that everyone thought it was going to be. But God is still going to lead us out of that pit and into new life, into that hope and restoration as God's people. Because next week, we're going to talk about the tabernacle and the priests. And what does worship look like? What does worship really mean for us? That even in the pit of despair, we then can find hope, and that light of God shines into our life. So it's kind of a segue too into join us next week for even more. So.
Very good. Well, thanks, Pastor. Y'all have a good night.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you all, and I will see you next week.
What chapters do we need to read for next week?
Oh, next week is 25 through 31.
All right. Thanks.
Isn't that funny?
All right. Good, everybody. Y'all.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks again. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Have a good holiday weekend. See you at church on Sunday.
Absolutely.
Looking forward to a cup of coffee with everybody.
Oh, yes.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Good session tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here.